They didn't always get the spotlight, the awards, or the front row recognition, but their sound, their message, and their influence shaped gospel music in powerful ways. From soul-stirring vocals to boundary-breaking innovation, we're diving into 10 underrated artists who changed gospel music forever. 1. Thomas Whitfield. Before Whitfield came along, most gospel choirs sounded pretty much the same. They had energy, they had soul, but they didn't have that cinematic quality that made you feel like you were watching a movie. Whitfield changed all that by borrowing ideas from classical music, jazz, and even pop arrangements. He wasn't afraid to use full orchestras, complex harmonies, and dramatic musical moments that built up like a roller coaster. His big break came when he started working with various choirs around Detroit, but it was his collaboration with the Thomas Whitfield Company that really put him on the map. The guy had this incredible ability to take a simple gospel song and turn it into something that sounded like it belonged in Carnegie Hall. He used strings, horns, and sophisticated vocal arrangements that nobody else was doing in gospel music at the time. The first song that absolutely blew people's minds was "I Shall Wear a Crown." This wasn't your typical gospel tune. It started soft and mysterious, almost like a whisper, then built into this massive wall of sound that could make you cry and shout at the same time. The way Whitfield arranged the voices was pure genius. He had different sections of the choir coming in at different times, creating these layers of harmony that seemed to float in the air. The orchestration was so rich and full that it sounded like heaven had its own symphony orchestra. Then came the showstopper, "Oh Hallelujah." Whitfield's influence spread like wildfire through the gospel community. Suddenly, every choir director wanted to create those lush orchestral arrangements. Church musicians started studying his scores, trying to figure out how he created those incredible sounds. He wasn't just writing music. He was creating a whole new language for gospel expression. The man was also a master at working with voices. He could take a group of church singers and mold them into something that sounded professional enough to record albums. His arrangements challenged singers to reach higher notes, hold longer phrases, and blend their voices in ways they had never tried before. Many gospel artists who came after him would point to Whitfield as the person who showed them what was possible with a gospel choir. 2. Margaret Durow. Margaret Durow might not be a household name, but her fingerprints are all over modern gospel music. Born in Los Angeles in 1941, she grew up in a musical family where creativity flowed as naturally as conversation. Her father was a minister, and her mother played piano, so Margaret was surrounded by church music from day one. But what set her apart wasn't just her musical ability. It was her gift for writing songs that connected with people on a deeply personal level. Durow had this amazing talent for taking complex spiritual concepts and turning them into songs that felt like personal prayers. She didn't write music that showed off how clever she was. She wrote music that made people feel understood and loved. Her songs had this intimate quality, like she was sitting right next to you, sharing her heart. The song that really put her on the map was "Give Me a Clean Heart." This wasn't just a gospel song. It became an anthem for anyone who had ever made mistakes and wanted a fresh start. The beauty of this song was in its simplicity. The melody was easy to sing, but the words hit you right in the soul. Durow wrote it during a time when she was going through her own spiritual struggles. And that honesty came through in every line. The song didn't preach at you or make you feel guilty. It just acknowledged that being human is complicated, and sometimes we need help getting back on track. Churches all over the country started singing "Give Me a Clean Heart," and it became one of those songs that defined modern gospel worship. But what's really amazing is how the song traveled beyond gospel circles. R&B artists started recording their own versions, and it became a crossover hit that introduced Durow's writing to a much wider audience. Her second mind-blowing contribution was "I'm Glad." This song showed a completely different side of Durow's creativity. While Give Me a Clean Heart was intimate and personal, I'm Glad was this gorgeous, flowing piece that painted pictures with words and music. What's remarkable about Daru is how she influenced the way gospel songs were written. Before her, many gospel songs were pretty straightforward. They told you what to believe and how to feel. Daru's songs invited you into a conversation. They asked questions, explored doubts, and celebrated the messy, complicated process of spiritual growth. She also changed how gospel music dealt with melody and harmony. Her songs had these unexpected chord changes that kept you interested, but they never felt weird or forced. She had this gift for finding the perfect musical phrase to match the emotional content of her lyrics. Other songwriters started studying her work, trying to figure out how she created such beautiful, meaningful songs. Daru wrote over 100 songs during her career, and many of them became standards in churches across the country. She had this incredible ability to write songs that felt both timeless and contemporary. Her music spoke to people regardless of their age, background, or musical preferences. 3. James Cleveland. Cleveland's genius was in understanding that gospel music needed to evolve to stay relevant. He looked at what was happening in R&B, soul, and even rock music, and he found ways to incorporate those elements into gospel without losing the spiritual foundation. He was one of the first gospel artists to really embrace the idea that church music could be sophisticated, polished, and professional while still being deeply spiritual. The man was also a master at working with choirs. Before Cleveland, most gospel choirs were pretty basic. They sang in unison or simple harmony, and the arrangements were straightforward. Cleveland changed all that by creating these complex, layered arrangements that turned choirs into musical powerhouses. He taught singers how to use their voices as instruments, how to create texture and dynamics, and how to work together to create something bigger than the sum of their parts. Cleveland's first game-changing song was Peace Be Still. This wasn't just a gospel song, it was a musical earthquake that changed everything about how gospel records were made. The recording featured the angelic choir, and from the very first note, you knew you were hearing something special. Cleveland's piano playing was bold and dramatic. The choir's harmonies were rich and complex, and the overall production had this big, powerful sound that nobody had achieved in gospel before. What made Peace Be Still so revolutionary was how Cleveland structured the song. Instead of just singing the same verses and choruses over and over, he created this musical journey that built and developed throughout the entire performance. He used call and response between himself and the choir, instrumental breaks that let the music breathe, and dynamic changes that kept listeners on the edge of their seats. But it was Lord Help Me to Hold Out that really demonstrated Cleveland's ability to create pure musical magic. This song was emotional dynamite. It started with Cleveland's raw, passionate vocals over simple piano accompaniment, then gradually built into this massive group performance that could move mountains. The way Cleveland sang the lead was absolutely incredible. His voice had this rough, emotional quality that made every word feel like it came straight from his heart. The arrangement of Lord Help Me to Hold Out was brilliant in its simplicity. Cleveland knew exactly when to add elements and when to pull back. The song had these moments of quiet intensity where you could feel the emotion building, followed by explosive releases where the entire choir came in with full power. It was like watching a master conductor control a musical storm. Cleveland's influence on gospel music can't be overstated. He proved that gospel artists could make high-quality recordings that competed with anything coming out of the secular music world. He showed that church music could be artistic and sophisticated without losing its spiritual impact. Most importantly, he mentored countless singers, musicians, and choir directors who went on to become stars in their own right. The Gospel Music Workshop of America, which Cleveland founded, became a training ground for gospel artists all over the country. Every summer, thousands of musicians would gather to learn from Cleveland and other gospel legends. These workshops created a network of artists who shared Cleveland's vision for what gospel music could become. 4. Willie Neal Johnson. Willie Neal Johnson was the kind of performer who could walk into a room and change the entire atmosphere just by opening his mouth. As the leader of the gospel keynotes, Johnson brought a style of storytelling and emotional delivery to quartet gospel that was unlike anything anyone had heard before. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1935, Johnson grew up listening to both gospel and secular music, and he found ways to blend those influences into something completely unique. What set Johnson apart from other quartet singers was his ability to make every song feel like a personal conversation. While many gospel groups focused on tight harmonies and polished performances, Johnson was all about raw emotion and authentic expression. He sang like he was telling you his life story, and you couldn't help but hang on every word. Johnson's first knockout punch was "Somebody to Lean On." This song showcased everything that made him special as a performer. The track started with Johnson's conversational vocal style, but as the song progressed, Johnson's delivery became more and more intense, building to these emotional peaks that could bring audiences to tears. The arrangement was perfectly suited to Johnson's style. The gospel keynotes provided subtle but effective backup, never overwhelming Johnson's lead vocals, but always supporting the emotional content of the song. The instrumentation was simple but effective, with piano and guitar providing a solid foundation that let Johnson's voice be the star. But it was "With God I'm Satisfied" that really demonstrated Johnson's genius as a gospel storyteller. This song was a masterclass in how to build emotional intensity through vocal performance. Johnson started the song in a reflective mood, almost like he was having conversation with the audience. But as the song progressed, his delivery became more passionate and urgent until he was practically shouting his faith to the world. The gospel keynotes recording style also influenced how gospel music was produced. Instead of trying to create perfect, polished performances, they embraced the energy and spontaneity of live gospel singing. Their records captured the feeling of being in church during an emotional service, complete with all the passion and intensity that came with that experience. Johnson's influence can be heard in countless gospel artists who came after him. His emphasis on emotional authenticity and personal storytelling became a template for how to connect with audiences on a deeper level. He showed that technical perfection wasn't as important as spiritual authenticity, and that message resonated throughout the gospel community. At 5, Olanda Draper. Olanda Draper burst onto the gospel scene like a musical explosion that left everyone wondering what had just hit them. Born in Memphis in 1953, Draper grew up surrounded by the rich musical traditions of the South, but he had his own ideas about what gospel music would sound like. As the leader of the Associates, Draper created a style of mass choir performance that was part gospel service, part Broadway show, and all spiritual power. The Associates weren't your typical gospel choir. Under Draper's direction, they became this well-oiled musical machine that could switch from delicate harmonies to roof-raising shouts in the blink of an eye. Draper trained his singers to be performers as well as vocalists, teaching them how to use their bodies, their facial expressions, and their stage presence to enhance the musical message. Draper's approach to gospel music was heavily influenced by his background in theater and his appreciation for different musical styles. He wasn't afraid to incorporate elements from R&B, jazz, and even classical music into his arrangements. This willingness to experiment made the Associates' performances unpredictable and exciting. You never knew what musical surprise was coming next. One song that established Draper as a major force in gospel music was "I Yield My All to Thee." This track was pure vocal gymnastics, featuring Draper's incredible range and the Associates' precision harmonies. The song started with a simple, almost hymn-like introduction, but quickly evolved into this complex musical showcase that demonstrated everyone's incredible abilities. The arrangement featured multiple key changes, complex vocal arrangements, and moments where different sections of the choir would trade musical phrases like they were having a conversation. Draper's lead vocals soared over the top of it all, demonstrating his incredible range and his ability to maintain emotional intensity even during the most technically challenging passages. But it was "We've Come to Praise the Lord" that really showed what Draper and the associates could do when they pulled out all the stops. This song was a celebration from start to finish, featuring infectious rhythms, call and response sections, and enough energy to power a small city. The track opened with this driving rhythm that immediately got people moving, then built into this massive group performance that sounded like a party in heaven. Draper also changed how gospel music was recorded and produced. His albums with the Associates featured sophisticated arrangements, high-quality production values, and the kind of musical polish that was usually reserved for secular recording artists. This raised the bar for gospel music production and helped establish gospel as a legitimate recording genre that could compete with any other style of music. 6. Andraé Crouch. When people think of Andraé Crouch, they might remember seeing him at the piano with Michael Jackson or Madonna. But way before he became Hollywood's go-to gospel guy, Crouch was quietly changing everything about how gospel music could sound. Born in 1942 in San Francisco, he grew up in a Pentecostal church where his dad was the pastor. His mom played piano, and little Andraé was basically raised on church music. What made Crouch special wasn't just his voice, though that silky, smooth tone could make you cry. It was how he mixed gospel with everything else: jazz, pop, rock, even a little bit of country. People in the church weren't always happy about it. Some folks thought he was getting too worldly, too fancy, but Crouch kept doing his thing, his song. "The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power" became a church classic almost overnight. Written in 1966, this song took the old-school message about salvation and wrapped it in a melody that felt fresh and new. The way Crouch arranged the harmonies, with those tight vocal stacks and that driving piano, it made people want to clap and sway. Even the most traditional churches couldn't resist adding it to their songbooks. The song spread like wildfire through black churches across America, and pretty soon, white congregations were singing it too. Then came Soon and Very Soon in 1976, and that song just exploded everywhere. It wasn't just the melody, though that ascending "soon and very soon" line was pure ear candy. It was how Crouch painted this picture of heaven that felt real and exciting, not scary or far away. The song became so popular that it crossed over to mainstream radio. People who never set foot in a church knew every word. Even today, you'll hear it at gospel concerts, church services, and even secular venues when they want to capture that feeling of hope and anticipation. Behind the scenes, Crouch was writing and arranging for other artists. He worked with everyone from Elvis Presley to Diana Ross. His arrangements on gospel albums helped shape the sound of contemporary Christian music for decades. When other producers wanted that gospel feel for their secular artists, they called Andraé. He had this gift for taking simple melodies and turning them into these rich, layered compositions that just moved people. 7. Sandra Crouch. Most people outside of California have never heard of Sandra Crouch, and that's exactly the problem. For over 4 decades, this woman, who happened to be Andrea Crouch's twin, was the heartbeat of gospel music in one of the nation's most popular cities. Sandra had this way of taking traditional gospel songs and making them feel brand new. She wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel, she just knew how to make those old spirituals and hymns hit differently. Her arrangements were simple but powerful, focusing on tight harmonies and call and response patterns that got entire congregations involved. He's Worthy became the Joy Gospel Singers' signature song in the early 2000s. What started as a simple praise song in their home church turned into something special when Sandra added her arrangement magic. The way she structured the verses, Building from a whisper to a full-throated celebration, it gave people chills. The song would start with just Sandra's voice, clear and sweet, declaring God's worthiness. Then the other singers would join in, layer by layer, until the whole choir was rocking the sanctuary. Churches all over California started requesting it, and soon it spread to other cities through word of mouth and bootleg recordings. What made Sandra special was her commitment to her community. While other gospel artists were chasing record deals and national tours, she stayed home and poured into local talent. She mentored young singers, organized gospel workshops, and made sure there was always a place for traditional gospel music in California's changing musical landscape. Dozens of singers who went on to have successful careers got their start under Sandra's guidance. 8. Dorothy Norwood. Dorothy Norwood earned her nickname, the world's greatest gospel storyteller, the hard way, by making people cry, shout, and feel every emotion possible through her songs. Born in Atlanta in 1935, she discovered early that she had this gift for taking Bible stories and making them feel like they were happening right in front of you. Norwood's style was different from other gospel singers. She didn't just sing songs, she performed them like one-woman plays. Her voice could go from a whisper to a roar, and she used every technique in the book to draw people into her stories. Sometimes she'd sing, almost like preaching with melody. Other times she'd belt out notes that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. Shake the Devil Off became her signature song in the 1960s, and it perfectly captured her storytelling style. The song told the story of spiritual warfare in terms everyone could understand. Norwood didn't use fancy theological language. She made it sound like neighbors talking over the fence. But her delivery was pure fire. She'd start the song almost conversationally, like she was sharing some good advice. Then, as the story got more intense, so did her voice. By the time she got to the chorus, she was practically commanding the devil to get lost, and audiences couldn't help but get caught up in the drama. Johnny and Jesus was even more powerful. This song told the story of a young man who had to choose between following Jesus or following the world. Norwood performed it like a movie, with different voices for different characters. When she sang Johnny's part, her voice became young and uncertain. When she spoke as Jesus, her tone was warm and inviting. And when she described the consequences of Johnny's choices, you could hear the heartbreak in every note. The song was overlong, but nobody cared. They were too busy being transported into the story. What made Norwood special was her ability to make ancient stories feel contemporary. She would take a Bible story that people had heard 1,000 times and find new angles, new emotions, new ways to make it relevant. Her performances were like going to church and watching a Broadway show at the same time. She would act out the parts, change her voice for different characters, and use facial expressions and gestures that made you feel like you were right there in biblical times. 9. Roberta Martin. Born on February 12, 1907 in Helena, Arkansas, Roberta moved to Chicago as a child, where her destiny would unfold. She didn't start out aiming for gospel greatness. In fact, she studied classical piano and had dreams of being a concert pianist. But God and gospel had other plans. By the 1930s, she had teamed up with Thomas Dorsey and began diving into the world of sacred music. In 1933, Roberta took a bold step and formed the Roberta Martin Singers, a group that would eventually be recognized as one of the greatest gospel ensembles of all time. She had a gift not just for playing, but for arranging voices in a way that pulled people straight into the presence of God. Her style was gentle but powerful, sophisticated but soaked in soul. Unlike most female gospel artists of her time, Roberta didn't belt out high notes or deliver fire and brimstone sermons through her songs. She let her arrangements and her piano playing speak volumes. And believe me, they did. If there's one song that stamped Roberta Martin's legacy, it's Only a Look. Written and first recorded in the 1940s, this song quickly became a staple in black churches across America. Its lyrics were simple. Only a look at Jesus, also bowed down with care, he has the answer. For all your burdens he will bear. But the emotional weight behind the performance was unforgettable. With her group behind her, Martin created an arrangement that was tender, slowly building to a soft climax that left people in tears. Unlike the fiery performances many gospel audiences were used to, this song soothed the soul. It showed that gospel didn't have to be loud to be powerful. Today, Only a Look is still performed in churches and has been covered by everyone from Mahalia Jackson to Yolanda Adams. Another masterpiece from her catalog is Try Jesus, He Satisfies. Roberta didn't just write this song, she gave it wings. The track, filled with deep trust in God's promises, was performed with a kind of grace that only Roberta and her singers could deliver. When the Roberta Martin singers performed this, there was no shouting or jumping, just harmonies so clean and heartfelt they made the room feel still. It was the kind of gospel that made you think, made you feel comforted. It became a song of assurance during a time when the black community faced widespread racial discrimination and economic hardship. Through her music, Roberta offered something rare: peace. One reason Roberta Martin remains underrated is because she wasn't interested in the limelight. She rarely sang lead, and she wasn't a big talker, but she was a pioneer behind the scenes. She mentored James Cleveland, who would go on to become one of the most celebrated names in gospel. She also published songs under Roberta Martin Studio of Music, giving space for other artists to be heard. She passed away in 1969, but her influence didn't die with her. To this day, choir directors still borrow her arrangements, and historians refer to her as the woman who brought classical beauty to gospel. 10. Sally Martin. Now, if Roberta Martin was the calm composer, Sally Martin was the firecracker that lit the fuse. Born on November 20th, 1895, in Pittsfield, Georgia, Sally was destined to make waves. And boy, did she ever. She didn't start singing professionally until her 30s, but once she stepped on stage, nobody could ignore her. Her voice wasn't pretty in the traditional sense. It was gravelly, raw, and full of conviction. But that's what made it real. When Sally sang, she wasn't performing. She was testifying. In the early 1930s, she became one of the first singers to promote Thomas Dorsey's gospel songs, helping to bring modern gospel into the church mainstream. Before that, most churches only wanted traditional hymns and spirituals. Sally brought a new sound, louder, livelier, more emotional, and people either loved it or hated it. But either way, they listened. While this song existed long before Sally Martin, her version gave it a whole new life. When she sang Just a Closer Walk with Thee, she made you feel like she had just stumbled out of a storm and was walking hand in hand with God. Her gritty delivery and no-frills style stripped the song down to its emotional core. She didn't need fancy runs or choir backup. She told the truth with her voice, and churches responded. Her take on this classic was recorded and played on black gospel radio stations, helping to build her name outside of Chicago and into Southern and Midwestern churches. Another standout in Sally Martin's catalog is God Specializes. This song emphasized God's ability to fix what no one else could. He specializes in things thought impossible. It became a healing anthem for people dealing with sickness, poverty, and heartbreak. When Sally sang it, there was nothing rehearsed about it. She sang like she knew what it meant to depend on God when the world said no. She wasn't a trained vocalist, but she knew how to reach people's hearts, and that's what gospel is about. Sally was known for being firm. Some even said she was hard to work with, but that's because she believed gospel deserved respect. She fought for it in every way, on the stage, in the boardroom, and in the community. She passed away in 1988 at the age of 92, leaving behind a legacy that made it possible for women and especially black women, to lead in gospel music with both voice and vision. And there you have it. Which of these legends did it for you with their songs? Drop a comment below, like this video, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that matters.